Theo Dawson, a legend and a really interesting background. I'll just say, from midwifery to Hollywood arts and advertising to University of Berkeley to I think the last 15 years or so running Lectica. Could you tell us kind of what Lectica is and what you're really doing there?
Lectica is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to build learning tools, including assessments, that support and evaluate mental development. And our ultimate objective is to ensure that these tools and the learning models that they're based upon get adopted by public school systems so that every child has an opportunity to develop optimally within our system, regardless of where they are, where they start out.
Yeah. And does
So
your
you can
focus
imagine
extend
the
out?
kinds of tools we're trying to create are universally applicable in any context with a person performing at any level.
And does it extend beyond schools, your kind of hope or your mission for Lectica to organizations, to the community in general?
Well, that's the nonprofit mission. So the nonprofit owns a for-profit, and the
Hmm.
for-profit really offers us the opportunity to build enough of an income so that we can actually fund the nonprofit activities. We haven't quite gotten there completely yet. It's really been a long haul. But we did get involved in 2002. We became involved in leadership development when we were called in by the at that time the National Security Agency, and then later by the entire intelligence community in the United States, to help them with a problem called VUCA skills. And the military had only recently come up with that label, and they wanted us to help them understand what it actually meant. What are these skills? We know that they involve certain areas of skill, but we don't know what the specific skills are, and we don't know how to support people in learning them. So we began a long project that went on for about 6 years with the federal government, just building the LDMA, which is the leadership decision making assessment that we still is our the favorite assessment of for the adult community that we've ever created. And then trying to understand not only what the skills were that contributed to being able to handle VUCA conditions, but how we could evaluate the quality of those skills and the level of those skills, and how we could support people in building them. So it's exactly the same mission that we have in the nonprofit sector. Use exactly the same tools. It's exactly the same learning theory. The assessments are built in basically the same way and follow the same developmental models, except that we're doing it in the adult world in a different domain than we are doing it often when we're working within the school system. So I have to say,
Yeah.
leadership's just these skills should be taught all the way down, to middle school at least, and unfortunately they aren't, which also means that even among adults who are working hard to build them, we're not where we could be if we started earlier with these skills.
Yeah. This little Prometheus community we have here, we capture our mission as saying we want leading to be clear and leaders to be common. And it strikes me that you want learning to be clear and learning to be common as well.
Yes, yes, and I want it to be. I want the tools that we build to be the kind of tools that people can pick up and start playing with without much of an introduction, or without any preliminary skills. So we're working very hard on something we call micro V calls and the micro V call maker in order to create ways for people who just land on our site and look around to find tools that they can use to learn how to build skills and learn more optimally.
Yeah.
And the micro call makers are one of those things that we're experimenting with right now to help people get started building the basic learning skills in our model so that they can optimize their own learning in any context, anywhere, anytime, just by using a few simple skills.
Yeah. I love that. One more kind of background question. You have a bunch of blog articles, and one of them, I just love the title, but I'm not sure what the story is. So I'll ask you here. The title is How I Was Seduced into Trying to Fix Education.
Yeah, there's an academic version of that one too. That's a chapter in a academic book. Um, what are you curious? What are you most curious about with respect to that? You want to know how I got
Well,
seduced?
it sounds like no, well, it sounds like it captures your passion, kind of the genesis of why you've immersed yourself into this for all these years. There's a founding story there
Yes,
somewhere, or an origin story.
there's a lot of origin story there. There's parts of the story that women can relate to who are my age, where, in school, everybody said, "Oh, well, look at you. You got really high scores on this test, so you ought to be getting better grades." In the counselor's office, I was told, "You're performing in the 90th percentile. That's amazing. Good for you." Um, no one ever suggested to me that I could actually do something with that the entire time I was in school. No one ever said, "You could do anything you want." Because I'm also a polymath, so I was kind of good at everything, but not great at anything. So I didn't shine. I wasn't one of those talented kids who got, attention for shining on something. I was just kind of good at everything and was interested in everything and got these high scores on these tests. But I was being prepared and groomed to be a housewife, and that made me feel really awkward about education. It didn't feel really like it was what it needed to be. So that was a kind of initial sense that I had. And then I ended up on the street because my parents disowned me because I was a smart ass and was homeless for a little while and left, left high school early. So I always loved to tell my students who were struggling that I was a dropout. Because I think, we think that those choices that we make early in life or things that happen to us early in life are going to end up defining us in negative ways. And in the end, we turned that one around and made it a positive way. Got my way back into schooling and all the way to college with scholarships and got pregnant. So I had to go through that whole process of being a single woman deciding, am I going to do this? Am I going to have this baby? And I decided to have the baby. And I decided that really wanted to have a home birth because by then I was totally a rebel and not really trusting of social institutions at that point. So I had my baby. I ended up having my baby in the hospital because I couldn't find a doctor who would do it at home. And it was the worst experience of my life. I've never felt so demeaned. And and yet nothing else has happened to me, including my parents disowning me, has made me feel that demeaned. And so I decided that I was going to save women and become a midwife. It was a long road. It took 5 years to get to a point where I could feel safe doing births on my own without a physician right by my side. I did that for 10 years, and it was probably the most formative period of my life because I had my own children at the time, which is really important. But I also got to be present with many, many families, and most of those families had multiple children in multiple age groups. And I started to notice really early on that something bad was happening to their children when they got to be about 8 years old and in school, in conventional schools, where they just lost their passion for learning. It was like somebody had taken the life force away from those children. And I couldn't stand it. That you're stealing their life force. Something bad's happening here. But I also noticed that people were homeschooling their kids or had their kids in Montessori or alternative forms of education that were more student responsive. Those kids seemed to keep that passion. So I decided I wasn't going to buy what was the common wisdom of the time that something happens to our minds when we're 8 that makes us stop liking learning. And I decided it was something happens to our children at that time that makes them stop loving learning. So I homeschooled my kids. I unschooled them using the Holt framework. And it was scary for me. It was really scary for me to do that. It was a hard thing to talk me into. My partner at the time was really gung ho. And I said, okay, we're going to try it and we'll just see what happens. And lo and behold, the children just learned. We didn't even have to do anything. They were just always after something that they were interested in learning more about. And we never even had to make suggestions. There was always something that they were pulling on that they wanted us to give them access to. We built a community around that, and the kids were homeschooled until they were, about middle school age, and then they started choosing schools in the Toronto area to go to. And then I had a burnout from my midwifery, and it was dramatic and horrible. I lost everything, lost my friends, I lost my kids for a while. It was really, really bad. And I lost myself for a while. I had post-traumatic uh, anxiety and problems that took me about 4 years to work through. During the time that I was doing that, I linked up with someone who wanted to create an advertising business in Los Angeles. And so my next career was in advertising. And I became an advertising executive in Los Angeles, Hollywood, California, um, doing something that was not life and death, but everybody thought was. And for a while, it was a really good way for me to take a break from being a do-gooder and to recover myself and heal. And then it became tedious and awful, and I started to want to go back to school and learn something new. And so I ended up leaving that profession, and because I got into UC Berkeley's graduate school, which is when I was a child or a teenager, I fantasized about going to UC Berkeley, and I got into UC Berkeley in my 40s. And all of those experiences had made me, number one, love people. So midwifery makes you love people because it's when you see people in these intense situations where they're super challenged and you see them being able to come out on the other side whole and healthy and joyful over and over and over again, you just got to love that. There's nothing not to love about that. And I also learned to love the children and to feel a lot of anxiety actually about what was happening to many of those children, because I just kept seeing that life force getting snuffed out, that drive that every kid that I ever caught had in the early years of their lives. And so I also came with an interest in moral psychology and what it means to be moral, how we become more moral people, more effective people. Because I'd started out with this do-gooderitis, and then I'd failed completely, and I had a lot of questions about what that failure meant in terms of my goodness as a human being or the value of me as a human being. So I'm studying moral philosophy, moral development. I'm and I am really drawn to developmental psychology from an educational point of view. So, because I thought if we can understand well enough how people learn and how our brains are designed to learn, how we're designed to learn, not how we can best memorize, but how our brains are designed to learn. If we could understand that better, and we could make tools that would support that kind of learning and also make assessments that would measure that kind of learning, because at that time, I really didn't think we could make any change in society around education unless we could demonstrate what learning in this more normal way actually does for the development of the mind. Because what was happening at that time was that Montessori and schools of that kind were not testing their children. They weren't testing the kids, and they were trying to get into the public education system, but they couldn't get in because the kids didn't in Montessori didn't do any better on the tests that they were using in the schools. And Montessori looked more expensive and it looked hard. So they just decided, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing because the kids don't do any better. Well, I knew, and the people at Montessori know, and the people in many other schools who are allowing children to learn normally, they know, Tom, that there's something very special that happens when you allow children to learn normally. And so that was my that was the thing that was calling me. And I ended up doing like 4 years of postdoc psychometrics in order to learn how to make the assessments or make assessments that that we were trying to have become a thing that measured something more like the development of the mind than measuring some specific knowledge. Because that, to me,
Yeah.
a well-developed mind is all you really need. And I think, the life that I've lived is proof of that. I think in so many ways, there was nothing there. I had none of the advantages that would make you be able to be where I am today. And yet I couldn't be here today unless I had gone through all those things that I went through, in order to be able to survive and thrive and have interesting experiences in this life.
Yeah, what a great story there, Theo. And it leads me to two questions that I'll start with. And for those of you who haven't read any Theo stuff, I'm going to use some Theo jargon, and you'll catch up real quick. So one of the questions I have, Theo, is this, or the contrast, the I'll say the serendipity or the unexpected experience in your own learning journey, things that you did that later were valuable for you. And I try to reconcile that with how I hear, and I think I hear, maybe I hear wrongly, so I'd like you to help me understand. Is this the idea in V-coding and micro V-coding where it seems very structured and there seems to be a kind of a planned, almost linear sequencing about it, and yet part of learning might maybe knowledge gathering might be good for that, but there's something more experiential that's maybe more organic or less plannable. And I'll just let you react to that idea and help me understand how you think of it.
Well, let me start by saying this. We have no teleology in mind at all. So when you talk about planning and scripting, that's not part of what we do. We don't do that. What we're doing is we are taking evidence about how the mind works, how the natural learning process works. And we have, not by ourselves, by the way, this was invented by almost everybody who did research in learning in the last century. Like, so all I did was say, wait a minute, you guys are all talking about the same thing. And it's this virtuous cycle. And the virtuous cycle has no content in it whatsoever. It's a series of actions. And it involves a set of skills that you teach your mind. You teach, and what awareness is one of those skills, like the ability to. These just died. Let me know when I come back. When
Yeah,
you can start.
I can hear you. No, you're good.
Okay. Um, um, there are a series of steps and skills that are designed to tap into the natural learning process, which involves this cycle called the dopamine opioid cycle, that many people described in the last century, in the developmental community. But it requires interaction with the environment for it to work. So when a kid's learning to walk, that cycle is being put to work in the learning to walk. If you're trying to learn how to be more attentive in your conversations with others, then that would be a skill that you would apply the cycle to. The idea being that if we tap into the natural cycle, that it's designed to be kind of an energy pump, so that rather than being arduous, learning becomes pleasurable, exciting, and you want more. So a lot of people will
Yeah.
say, oh, like I really want to learn to be a doctor, but oh my God, all of the horrible study and stuff you have to do that. If our programs were designed differently, they'd be saying, I'm learning how to be a doctor, and oh my God, am I having fun? Just simply because they would be constantly tapping into that cycle by just grabbing for that next little skill. And when I say skill, I mean a way broader range of things than you might mean by the word skill. So it's a skill we say is anything that develops with practice. We don't even put a positive valence on it because you can build bad skills or skills that have negative consequences as well. But a skill is anything that you can actually practice in the moment.
So you can practice, any skill that you would like in the moment. And if you are practicing it using the micro recall process, what you're doing is you're setting yourself up to figure out what's the next juicy bit of that skill that you want to work on. And that's all about your process, your learning, your intuition about what comes next. So we also teach people to get in touch with that Goldilocks zone so that they can tell. And also this process, one of the magical things about using this process and having it be your primary learning process is that it helps to build what Piaget called the feeling of necessity. So you're basically using tools that build your mind.
Now we've lost you, Theo.
Mother, for example, that's connected to emotion and senses, your sensory experience and memories and, thousands and thousands and thousands of connections to other parts of to various parts of your brain. Building skill is like that too. It's, you're working on a skill that's going to lead eventually to your building a bigger skill. But in the process of building that one tiny little piece of it, you're making the connections. And so you just build up that network of connections with micro recall after micro recall after micro recall. And when people are first learning the skill of micro recalling, it's a lot of practice of specific things because we do have things that you need to learn how to do to be good at it. But after that, it becomes an automatic process that's happening in the background. It's a habit of mind that you don't even really need to think very much about or be very conscious of, except perhaps at the setting step where you decide what it is that you're after this time. And at the reflect step where you kind of do a little tiny itty bitty microsecond long evaluation of how it went and which one to try next. So that process doesn't have any content in it. You put all the content in it.
Yeah, so it seems like the balance is that there are in fact some conditions that some foundations you lay to learn something, and you learn the foundations, and then those are the things that you can build further with, like reading.
Yeah.
You learn letters and phonetics before you can read, right? But
Maybe.
the experience the experience I think is more organic and individual and less scripted and more experiential. Does that sound
And
right?
it's tuned to the mechanism in your mind so that it becomes more automatic much more quickly because we're not trying to fight the mind. We're trying to meet the mind and honor its preferences.
Yeah. So I'm not, maybe everyone's heard of the dopamine opioid cycle, but maybe you could just level set that with people briefly and help explain what's going on and why that seems to be a natural process.
Well, and most people have probably heard about it with respect to drugs, yeah, and dependency, and in a negative kind of light. But it actually is intended, it evolved as our natural learning motivation system. And it's a cycle, which is why V calls a cycle, is because we're trying to copy a cycle. It's a cycle that involves a desire to strive, which is the dopamine piece. So there's something that's driving the dopamine to increase, like I see a cool thing I could do out there. And so the dopamine release gets you started, gives you that energy to get started. And then learning new skills is hard work, right? So you need to have that drive in front of it so that you're going to persist and you're just going to keep going. So it gets that cycle started, and then you try to do that thing that you want to be able to learn to do. And then you get two kinds of feedback. You get, well, three kinds. You get nah feedback, you get bad feedback, like negative feedback, ouch feedback. And you can get positive feedback. And if you are successful, you get an opioid release, which then leads to another dopamine hit.
So I put in the chat a graphic of the learning cycle that Theo works with, her VCOL cycle, and it's 4 parts, and it's I think you'll recognize these as similar to other ideas of how learning happens. And so setting is, in my words, Theo will probably be better, I'm sure, explaining this, but setting is really where you're making that dopamine connection of this is something I want to learn. You're finding your motivation. Seeking is you're kind of exploring, whether it's intellectual knowledge or experience or advice or whatever it is, and learning that those things that you want, applying them is, deepening that learning. And then reflecting is, what's the outcome there in terms of what does that lead to next? So these different outcomes that Theo was talking to, maybe it didn't work out so well, we'll try something else. Or it was great, and the next thing seems obvious. I learned the letter A and B. Oh, I want to learn all these letters and reflect or not, but I just
Set,
kind of,
seek, apply, reflect. So set, I want to become a better listener. Seek, I want to talk to my mom about what that means to her. Apply, next time I'm in a group, I'm going to try to focus on the person that's talking. Reflect. Yeah, that was hard. I did okay for a minute there with Judy and really found it much harder to listen to John. That's it.
very simple. So we're going
Really.
to do a breakout now, about 15 minutes. We're going to ask people to use those ideas because we like to give people a chance to process what they're hearing and thinking with each other and to do a little applying, right? And so I'll put some simple instructions in the chat space here. And
Do you have a copy of the VCalling skills map?
I put it in the chat. I put V calling, and then also I have one of the surroundings, the
Yeah.
+7 skills. Yeah.
Well, oh no, this is the VCalling skills map. It's different from the
Oh, I do not. Then maybe if you want to find that for folks, and we
um
can come
you
back
can
to that
all
after the
find
breakout.
that if you just go to lectica.org. Uh let me just find it first, just to make sure. .org. Actually, I was wrong about that. You cannot see it on the page that I thought you could see it on.
Okay. So here, let us get on the breakout room, and I'll have about 15 minutes to come back to what to that. So the assignment for breakout is just talk to each other about what something is that you might be seeking, kind of as a learner. What are you thinking of learning, and then what are you doing to I'm sorry, I'll back up. You're anything that we've talked about so far in our topic today that you think is interesting. So how might you seek more, or what will you do about that to acquire more experience or knowledge? And then where you kind of try that out, and how might you anticipate that the implications of the impacts of that, because you haven't done it yet, so it's not really reflective, it's proflective, I guess, if there's a word like that. And we'll let you explore that using these different concepts and also processing what you've heard so far from Theo. So here we go, 15 minutes with a really short return.
And we start people out with working on emotion, because everybody's got something around emotion that they can work on. I want to be better emotionally regulated. So I want to find out what it is that makes me angry, and or I want to understand. I want to explore how other people's emotions affect me. Something along those lines, but doing it one little tiny thing at a time, like, so when you see someone angry, how do you feel? Just notice that. And then the next time you see someone angry, do the same exact thing again. And the reflect step is always, what did I learn there? And so you're building up a repertoire of understanding about this way, this thing of seeing someone else angry, and you're building a network in your mind about that because you're doing it across contexts, you're doing it across people, you're doing it, at different times of day, you're doing it around different kinds of situations. And pretty soon you've got this new way of seeing something that you didn't have before. And then once you feel satisfied with that, then you say, okay, what's the next step? What do I want to do next? What do I want to do with this next? And there's usually a micro call for that. So people can go in there and play on their own. They can read our articles. A lot of people are teaching themselves how to micro call that way. Or you can come and actually do a course with us and learn it well enough so that you can start really using it in the world and possibly even helping other people learn how to do it. So we have a kind of a Tupperware thing with a VCall and practice course. We say that, that we'll teach anybody how to teach it, as long as they promise that they'll teach 2 more people how to teach it. So that we can kind of get some action going in the world, with more and more people building that skill. And especially people like teachers and, people who work closely with other human beings, or people who are making big, important decisions in VUCA conditions, who really, really, really need to build skills that allow them to be able to be agile in those kinds of situations. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what is, you talk about cognitive complexity, and I think it's a lot of what I do is work across domains and cross disciplines, and then try to find what sense people are making, and kind of cut through the differences in terms. And complexity is a term that's used a lot by a lot of different people, and I wonder if how you use it, and what are the basic elements of that that of cognitive complexity. What would your learning objectives be if you wanted to increase your cognitive complexity?
Well, you micro call if you want to increase your cognitive complexity. That's it. Nothing else works. It's accidental micro calling that increases the complexity of your brain, or intentional micro calling. And you can decide to just let it do its thing, or you can decide you want to be in charge. And if you want to be in charge, you have to learn the skills and figure out, how to override some of the brain's default settings because it has a bunch of them that keep us from growing optimally on their own. When we talk about complexity, we're usually talking about hierarchical complexity, because our developmental model is based on hierarchical complexity, in the sense of little ideas coming together with other ideas, building bigger ideas, connecting with other ideas, connecting with other ideas at another level, making new ideas. So we think of the learning process not in a rigid way, in a very organic way, as this process of constructing increasingly abstract and differentiated ways of understanding the world around us over time. So it's a slow, long process. And micro calling works so well because it is constantly putting you in a position where you're making connections across different parts of your mind, and you're doing it in a conscious way where you're kind of driving the car. We have this thing we call the active observer that's kind of telling you this is what you're supposed to be doing now. And you're actually commenting on what you're learning from situations rather than just letting it happen. You're saying, that was interesting, I'm going to try this next, or that didn't work, I think I need to just do that a little differently. That one worked. That one worked. I'm going to try to remember that one. But so this is how our minds naturally connect up. It's sort of like a tree, it's so a lot of people treated it like a staircase in the old days, like you go from this level to the next level to the next level to the next level. But it's way more like a tree, except that it's like a tree where the branches can interconnect again. So they don't just go out, but they connect across one another. It's a network. It's a rich network. Have you guys heard about the connectome? Is that a word that's familiar to you? This is
I
a
don't know what
wonderful new field that's been around now probably for 10 years. It still feels pretty new to me. In neuroscience, where people actually are learning how to take pictures of the neurons in our brains and show the interconnections between them. And one of their first findings, and they keep having this finding over and over again, is that the more connections there are between different parts of your brain that have different functions, the more likely it is that you're going to have the agility to be able to deal with a wide range of situations in life more competently than other people. And that kind of brain happens when through practice. It happens through the kind of practice we're talking about when we're talking about micro V calling, where you're just, you're constantly engaging in practice and reflection on practice, reflection on practice. And that is going to cause you to create a highly interconnected mind where, we're not trying to divorce feeling from knowledge anymore. We're celebrating the connection between them and what that gives us, including the ability to tell the difference between a truth and a lie, or something that's, makes sense and something that doesn't make sense. Yeah, so the connectome research was lovely for me because it's like someone let me see something I've been imagining for the last 15 years. And the brain really does work that way. And that takes me to something that I worry about a lot in current academics, and also in the way that people are using developmental ideas. There's still a tendency for people to want to divide up the brain into different things and to focus just on one piece of all of that, and to have contests about which one's important or which one's more important. And in fact, it's the connections between all of these capabilities that we have and all of the parts of us that are the thing that creates a good mind. That we don't even pretend that we're making decisions without emotion and sensory input and and external input. We don't pretend anymore. We're taking all of that in and we're bringing it to the party, and we're trying to make the connections across. Or we're not even trying, they're just naturally being made across these different parts of our minds. It's that embodied practice that builds a mind that is coherent enough to allow you to feel when something's not quite right. And even Piaget, like way back over 100 years ago, was saying the feeling of necessity, which we might call a eureka moment, or, yeah, that the pieces have finally fallen into place. A lot of the children coming out of our inner city schools now don't have any of that. They don't know what I'm talking about. They don't have a feeling because they think that something's correct when you got the right answer, because that's the way that they've been schooled. And people who learn this way, they know something feels more right because their mind is saying, yeah, all these things connect together and make sense together.
Yeah, you can connect that idea to their experience, even if it's intuitive, right? Even if it's unconscious
Right.
experience, it just makes sense experientially.
Right. And then if you're a good V caller and you've built a lot of other skills over the years, like really good skills for evaluating information, you can go and dig deeper, right? You can go say, okay, this doesn't feel right. I'm going to go look more. I'm going to dig deeper. But people are graduating from our schools and colleges not having any of that. And for those of us who have those feelings, it's like life itself, right? And it's hard to imagine what it would be like not to have those feelings.
So I have a question that I have a hard time formulating. So let me see how well I do. And this is when I think of this process of building more and more connections and more ideas into abstracting them further and further. There's a point at which you think maybe naively that you can somehow make more sense of bigger things or more complex things, but there's at some point where you can't do that. And in fact, you don't create this, you create enough cohesion to navigate many different areas, but you never quite pin them down. And at that higher or that more uh, that edge level anyway, I also find that language becomes less satisfying. And then there's a space for, images and ideas that are less concrete than language. And I don't know if you find any of this in your observations or your experience, or if this fits into your thinking at all of learning and complexity.
Well, I mean, I think we all have the experience of not having the words, but we have that at every level. Like that, we have that continuously throughout our lives if we're always learning. There's always times when we don't have any words. Um, Personally, I don't think that there are forms of communication that don't need words at the highest levels. Not that take us to a higher level. Like there's not a higher level above the levels that we can communicate around. But this brings up something for me that I think is really, really important. One of the reasons that we have focused on VUCA skills over all of these years, and we've never stopped focusing on them, is because in order to be able to transcend our own minds and our own capabilities, we often have to be able to work extremely effectively with others. And we don't have those skills. We just aren't schooled in those things. It's a rare thing to find somebody who's a virtuoso in any of the VUCA skills. And even our top leaders are performing, well below the level at which they would need to be able to perform on their VUCA skills in order to really be able to pull together a group of people who can work on these bigger problems that, no one person can hold. So, in my mind, the thing that we work toward is being able to work better and better with other human beings. And if we're building the skills for doing that at the same time that we're growing ourselves, it's partly growing us. And it's also helping us to have that humility that you need to have about your own perspective. We often say to people, the first thing you need to do is create an advisory board for yourself. And the advisory board should have people that you don't agree with on it, but who can talk you or change your mind, who can change your mind. And so they're usually people with different skills, different qualities, but you trust them to be able to change your mind if it's necessary to change your mind. We don't start having boards until we're CEOs. Like we just don't have anything in our culture that lets us have a place where we can practice this business of being able to work really, really well with others. There's a lot of other complicated things that are mixed in with this, but I think that if we want to transcend ourselves and in a sense, like transcend what we're capable of doing in language, then we have to be doing it with other people. And that means that building VUCA skills in our children, in our leaders, in everyone, intentionally working on building those skills is probably one of the best things we can do for humanity as a whole. Because the big problems that we're facing are so way too complex. It's going to take more than a community to solve these problems. It's going to take a worldwide community of people working together to solve these problems.
I couldn't agree with everything you just said there more. Absolutely. I have one more line of questioning, and then I'm going to open it up to all these raised hands. And we're going to use the raised hands, folks. So think of the questions you want to ask us. We're going to move to our plenary. And it's maybe the limitations of psychometrics, and is one way of thinking about it. But it's also some pushback and aversion that some people have to trying to measure human experience, and some aversion to stages. There's some controversy in the metasphere or the ecosphere about stage theory, and you do have
As there should
stages.
be.
Yeah. So give us your perspective on those things. And I'll just say that my biggest perspective is, that any psychometric is going to be a point, a point of information in the whole, not the whole of the information. And the weaponizing of it doesn't mean that the thinking or the measures are inherently bad just because people use them poorly. I mean, those are my simple perspectives on it, but tell me more.
I agree with the parents who don't let their kids be tested. Well, that's what I agree. However, that said, I also know that there is no way that we can get into a position where we can serve all children unless we have some means of measuring the effectiveness of what we're doing. We have to have a way that we can communicate the effectiveness. And legislators make these kinds of decisions based on statistics. You know, are we doing better? Are the kids happier? Are they learning faster? Are we having, you know, are the effects that we're claiming that we're getting something that we can see in numbers? I mean, who would ever thought a midwife would have become a psychometrician? You know, I only became a psychometrician because I saw that it was one of those if you can't beat them, join them things. You know, it was they're not going to stop. This isn't going to stop. The only way we can stop it is by building something that shows off what real mental development can look like. But we're super conservative in the claims we make here. We don't, we number everything. We don't give names to any of our levels. There is no level that's more valuable than any other level. We don't, you know, there's no teal, you know, in our arsenal. There's no idea of goodness attached to any of our levels either. And that's been one of the big problems, I think, in the developmental community. Started by my friend Kohlberg, who I loved his work, and it was amazing and seminal and necessary, and we couldn't be here without him. But this idea that we grow to goodness, it's wrong. We don't grow to goodness. We become more complex and more evil at the same time. So there's nothing better about being at a higher level in that sense. Performing at a higher level, not being at a higher level. Performing at a higher level suggests that we can do things that we couldn't do when we were performing at a lower level. But you miss stuff too. So one of the costs of becoming a more abstract thinker is you're not as good at dealing with stuff on the ground anymore. You know, that the way that you're thinking now kind of makes it harder for you to be able to get real and grounded about stuff. So there's deficits that happen as you develop. You know, you win some, you lose some. We say that we're scoring performances. We never say we're scoring people. That's one thing. This is a performance. It's not about you. It's about this performance. And so we don't say a person's at a level. We don't believe that there's some, you know, major organization in your brain that's at this holistic level. I'm definitely perform at a very complex, hierarchically complex level in my field of inquiry, but take me into a physics conversation and I'm a high school student. So there's no one kind of mind that we have. What we're really looking at when we see growth is a kind of growth of expertise. And we've just learned how to measure that growth of expertise in a way that's accurate enough so that it can tell us some things about what that person might find interesting to try next. No, so, and we don't just use that metric. We also use metrics that look at things like how clearly they're thinking. And we have metrics that look at the VUCA skills so that we can tell a story and then ask that person, is this story about you? Does this make sense to you? Is there something here that you feel like you could grab a hold of and make use of? And then we can see if they're making progress. You know, we can watch to see if progress is being made. And sometimes that's useful for people internally. Mostly that's useful for helping us get better at helping people learn. And we can look at this worked better than that worked, and we can continue to increase our skills. So I think that there's a value for assessment. We're even using our assessments in recruitment right now because it helps us get people into jobs that they're going to be happier in and have more satisfaction in. And there's no real other, this is one way in which you can tell whether that's going to be the case. But we never suggest to anybody that you just do one kind of thing or one kind of measurement. And we always have a place for human judgment and what human experts can do. judgment wise and on their own and in groups that add to our understanding of a particular individual's capabilities and the affordances of their knowledge. So we just have to be humble, and we have to stop all this nonsense of, thinking of people as being at levels and thinking of high levels as being superior to lower levels.
Great, thank you. I'm glad we had a chance to cover that. We're gonna move into questions from the field now, and I'm sure there'll be rich ones. And folks, we're going to use the raise hand feature, the one that's on the bottom of your screen in the thing. So that keeps us organized in terms of who's kind of in the queue. And we usually, Theo, have a little commercial break before we do that while people are thinking of their things. And for me, I just want to make sure that people who aren't familiar with us have a calendar link to our other events that we have here in Voices. So we've got Alicia Gerrara coming up in 2 weeks, and she is a complexity theorist, a philosopher, and but her early work was on intention and the relation, and kind of the relationship of cause and intention, and how much efficacy there is there in the world. So
That step.
Pardon me? The set step? Yeah, exactly. And so intention's out of fashion in some circles, but I'm anxious to follow this up with her. So because I'm certainly I have intention and it's good. I think the argument against it is kind of intentional bias, where it's keeping you from being open to other things, but just part of how we work. So I embrace the whole of how we work. Anyway, so that's the thing. Did you have anything that you wanted to share? Do you want us to give people a link to, it's lectica.com?
.org.
They'll find your, pardon me?
Lectica.org.
Okay.
And I'm a Medium blogger.
Okay, good.
But if you go to lectica.org and you go to the articles page, you'll see a long column of links to Medium articles on particular topics. So people often start there because it gives you a chance to look at things you're interested in.
Okay, excellent. And so now our first hand is Dave Fearon. Dave.
Well, this has been one of those moments where you say, finally, someone gets learning, and calling it normal. I love that. I'm also familiar with, and we discussed this in my group, with how people use expertise sometime to push themselves above people and hold people down, and treasure their expertise as a way of job security, talking about academia now, or anywhere. And when they come across what you're espousing and showing us, they're threatened. Wait a minute. My expertise is what's bread on the table. I don't want anyone coming up past me or pulling that down. There's a question in there. What do you think about expertise? Specific expertise.
Was that, what do I think about it?
Yeah. Where does it fit in your conversation about learning?
I mean, I think that expertise can mean more than one thing. And you talk about it in the academic context. I'm pretty familiar with that. And the need to retain your position.
Yes.
Expertise is a double-edged sword. That's what I think of expertise. So I think if we are going to continue to grow and develop, it's likely that we're going to have to make choices about where we go and what we get curious about and what we go deep in. Because I'm a polymath and I've gone down many roads, I feel like I do have some advantages there that keep me from becoming so narrow that I can't see anything else.
Yes.
Because I think that's the big danger of expertise and the way that we've structured our educational system. It kind of values getting narrower and narrower and narrower and then staking out territory. And what expertise really ought to be doing is rather than narrowing you, it should be actually making you more open to more kinds of input so that that expertise can get fleshed out and can be transferred to other contexts and can be communicated to others who aren't like you and who are working with different kinds of knowledge. So I think it's not expertise that's a problem so much as the way that we construct the silos in our institutions, just like we do in the business world.
Yes.
We create these silos and people aren't given opportunities or especially not rewarded for reaching a
Right.
class. We just don't have rewards in place for that. And that's part of that, my whole spiel about we've got to valorize VUCA skills, which is exactly that. It's prizing, celebrating the skill of being able to reach sideways and collaborate with someone who has a very different way of thinking about something. That also builds expertise, but it's a different kind of expertise that's more
Different
open,
kind.
broad, and it would take us to totally different places if we could restructure things like that. It would. I remember being in grad school and thinking everybody's fighting with one another at these conferences. It's my way. No, it's my way. No, it's my way. And I'm thinking, but wait a minute, you guys are all talking about the same thing. And so much overlap is there. Can't you see it?
Yeah.
Let's celebrate the overlap and figure out what we can do with that.
Yeah.
But you're just not encouraged to. The reward systems just don't work that way.
That's
In
right.
business, in the academy, in almost all professions, in the military, the reward systems just don't work like that.
Well, there's a frontier for us all, huh?
Got to be a rebel.
I'll just say
How
it's
to learn it.
certainly true in social media that you can't bring a different perspective because it's murderous when you try to open up that dialogue.
Yep.
And
Thank you.
you see the same thing that we see in expertise in social media, turf wars. Yeah.
Theo, what a wonderful opportunity to meet a VUCA scientist and a VUCA practitioner, trainer. So, 9/11 was not just a terrorist attack, but also at the front line. There's the story of stock market brokers combating the shocking oil prices, gold prices, and making counter offers. So perhaps in that sense, VUCA proved its effectiveness. So as someone reaching out to far, far broader audiences, how do you see the development, like over the last 10 years, from the moment you started teaching VUCA skills until now? How do you see the progression? And then is the climate emergency helping you out? Thank you.
I think it's very hard to answer the big questions, but I've actually just been publishing some new stats on LinkedIn prior to writing them up that show that we actually are having an impact. That the leaders that the people that we train to work with our materials are working with over time, we're making more progress with the leaders that we're working with. So that we've been building tools and trying to simplify the process of learning how to micro VCall and get people into that mindset faster. And we've seen a steady growth in VUCA skills scores over the last 15 years as a consequence, especially since we started talking about micro VCalling and we started using skill maps. Those have been the two most popular things we've done, and the two things that people can just pick up and run with. So we've also seen evidence that within work levels that we have progress as well. So over time, we've had increasing progress with helping managers get closer to where they need to be in their VUCA skills to be able to handle their roles. We're not there yet. I mean, it's going to take longer. And ideally, we won't have to just start with adults. We'll be able to start with children soon so that, because I think that at the level that most people are, the average level most people are performing in the workplace, we could get our kids there by the end of high school if we really valorize these skills. And just imagine how different the world would be if they were already lifelong micro VCallers with really good VUCA skills to start their lives in the world. Man, it would make such a difference.
Thank you very much. And actually, Professor Tom Bishop from who built the University of Houston's Foresight program and a sociologist by trade, and who happens to study the whole theory of social change. I would love to introduce you because you carry the same heart as he is, and especially, and his focus is on teach the future and primarily to children. I mean, adults too, but primarily to children. Thank you very much.
And I'm not talking about teaching kids things that we used to teach in college. I'm talking about teaching them where they are. Helping them build the skills where they are. Yeah. And letting them build them organically.
Mr. Visvesha, Dave Pendle.
Hi, Theo. I've really enjoyed your presentation and especially your response to the kind of controversies in the developmental world, to Tom with his last question. But I kind of was trained to teach adults in a master's, but one of the core theories that was drawn on in that is Kolb's learning theory.
Mhm.
And to my untutored eyes, it sounds a bit similar to what you're teaching. What is your model? What do you think the main differences are between the Kolb model of learning and yours?
Well, I mean, the differences are, I think we've gone a lot further in being able to explicate how it works, um and we're not just advising learning how to micro VCall. We're saying, let's learn this way only. Like, let's get rid of those other ways of learning, or only use them sparingly as part of the cycle. And let's rethink, how we learn from the bottom up. But these all of these theories, like you probably all are working with things that look like micro VCalls, or they look like VCalls at least, maybe not micro. And that's because during the 20th century, just about everybody who was studying learning was stumbling upon this cycle. And it was partly because it's partly Piaget's fault, and the beginning of the century, where people were really discovering that this is the way the mind wants to learn. And they did a whole lot of research with people in various situations, trying to understand, how is this working? How does this work? And people took those ideas, and mostly in the 20th century, they took them and they tried to apply them to conventional learning. So you get Kolb cycle applied to conventional learning. That's about stuff. And that's where the real big difference lies, is that I'm saying, stop applying it to stuff. It's not going to work because stuff doesn't get learned through this cycle. This cycle is about skill building. It's about taking knowledge and putting it to work and making it useful. So the knowledge has a big role, but it's not the focus of attention. The focus of attention is the building skills and making it useful. So I think the things that we've done is we've generalized it. We've studied the hell out of it and got better at getting it out there to people and making it usable knowledge, which is always hard. Going from theory to the usable knowledge always takes forever. And making it generalized, so that you don't need all of those other theories, because if you do this, you're already doing all those other things, because those things were created for specific circumstances. I mean, all the way to therapeutic modalities, that are virtuous cycles, to programming and agile, and they're all virtuous cycles.
Thanks. Good to hear that. Thank you.
Like we don't have Vishva's hand back yet, so we'll jump to Rose.
Thank you. Theo, very interesting. I'm learning so much. I'm going through this now, and then your story at the beginning, and this is where I was trying to crystallize this. And forgive me, I don't know all your work, so I'm really keen on learning more. I'm of a certain age. I've, worked full time for a number of years, probably muddled through a lot of that, very senior positions, and I am where I am now. And I'm finding I'm reflecting, so I'm taking the words that you have in your model, doing a lot of reflection, and either subconsciously or unconsciously or consciously, seeking to apply things in a different way. So I'm not doing it necessarily as seek, apply, reflect. I'm just observing or thinking, what did I go through, and did I actually go through it and understand it in the way that I should have? And because of my experience now, I actually see things differently. I suppose that's a broader learning, but it's almost doing it backwards. Does that make sense? What my question? Um,
Mhm.
and is that something like, is there a time dimension to it? Um, you say it's continuous, your model, it's continuous, but it's almost like I need to turn everything upside down now and start as if I'm a child and I'm learning everything again afresh.
You can
Any,
go in any direction you want.
but any insights into that?
I think you can take I think you can take the micro V call anywhere with you. And if it's in a re-examination of past events and actions, it's just as useful there. The thing that I would always say, though, is do it like a scientist, do it with curiosity, and try to stay in that curious mind rather than getting into a blaming or especially when we're reflecting on our own selves. It's extremely important that we discipline our active observers to be as non-judgmental as possible, so that these explorations can bear more fruit and cause us less pain.
Okay, thank you.
As someone who has made many mistakes over the course of her life and has quite a bit of practice with that, so
Yeah, I'm the last in line, so I'm going to let Vishwa's back. So I'm going to let Vishwa ask your question.
So it's a two-part question. The first part is, long time ago, I came up with this mission statement for my life. And that mission statement for my life has stayed true to me. But in the past 8 years, every single component of that mission statement has evolved. For example, the word evolve and devolve are part of that mission statement. But I now understand evolve and devolve more than just binaries or contrast to each other. I really understand the process more. So that's one thing about evolving meaning. And the second question is recall, a higher level efficiency of having the capacity to develop skills. How does this map these two different phenomena of evolving meaning and having a higher level of skill development? So one is knowledge and one is recall, skill development. How do you place this on the map, which I understand is the model schematic that you have created? So I'm asking for a cheat sheet to understand your work.
we have a lot of maps for a lot of different things. So we have a micro V calling map that's just got micro V calling skills in it. And then we have maps for all the VUCA skills and and anything that comes along and people say, I want to get better at this. We help them learn how to make these maps that break the skills down into tiny little pieces that can be practiced in the moment. So, part of my answer is that we're using the same technique to build VUCA skills as we are to build other skills in a sense, but we need the VUCA skills to be good in order to be able to build the other skills more effectively. So one set of skills is the skills that you need for learning, and the other set is the skills we're applying those skills to learning other things. So, I mean, that's the way that I think about them. And then, of course, they feed one another, don't they? Because as we're applying the VUCA skills to other things, we're learning more and building better VUCA skills at the same time. So everything's very mixed up.
You're saying the VUCA skills are recall, or are you saying the VUCA skills are the meaning making skills?
No, you know what? I just misspoke. So I mean V-calling skills. So V-calling skills are for learning to V-call. VUCA skills are some of the kinds of skills that you can V-call to learn. But you're also V-calling to learn V-calling skills. It's there. Everything is all connected to everything else. And people start to get this as they're learning how to micro VCall. They start to understand what I mean when I say crazy things like this, because they're thinking them themselves. So I would say the micro VCalling skills, you can take them everywhere forever. But any other skills that you develop, similarly, you can take them anywhere forever. And they can feed back on one another.
I have no idea, but I'll read more.
This is where it stops being simple. You just have to let it happen.
Yeah, learning to learn so that you can learn. So my question, I want to go back to I earlier brought up, I made the comment of the +7 in your VCall +7, and you kind of waved that off. Now,
I did, because
yeah.
it's our original model. So we are a micro VCalling organization. Everything we do is about learning. I'm going to make it worse for you.
No, it's okay.
So this organization is also a research sandbox. Everything that we do is designed so that we can learn from everything we do. And when we first created the VCall model as a standalone model, we were thinking of it as here's the VCall, and then here's the skills, the fundamental skills that go with that. And we just stopped thinking about it that way as our knowledge grew, and we became more aware of how micro VCalling had to be in order for it to really leverage the brain's natural mechanisms more effectively. The +7 skills ended up going into different places and different maps, and some of them stayed as micro VCalling skills, and some of them, found places in other kinds of skill maps.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to get your perspective there. I do
And when you
intuitively.
go look at,
Go ahead, sorry.
and when you go look at skill maps, it's really, really, really important not to think that they're the truth. We're not trying to model truth. We're just doing our best to kind of unpack skills to make smaller and smaller pieces to make it easier for people to practice. So they can be reorganized in other ways. You can treat them differently. The only thing that I would encourage you to remember is that a skill is something you can practice in the moment in our definition. So you have to ask yourself that question: am I actually practicing a skill, or am I trying to actually practice an emergent property? You can't practice an emergent property in the moment. You can only practice the skills that lead you to that emergence down the road. So, and that's really hard for people to do. We found that's one of the most difficult distinctions for people to make.
Yeah. What is an emergent property? Tell us more about that.
A dynamic leader is an emergent property.
Yeah.
I want to be a dynamic leader. Man, you got a lot of work to do, and it's a bunch of micro VCalling and a bunch of little skills. I want to be a good decision maker, an excellent decision maker, a virtuoso decision maker is an emergent phenomenon. It's, so there's so many things
I want
that
to have more influence.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the way that people describe leadership levels and what you're supposed to be able to do, most of those things are emergent properties. Either that, or they're really just aspirations, but that nobody really has defined well enough to know exactly what really goes with them. So we're trying to work with organizations to make those level descriptions something that they can actually act on. So, a map for every skill so that people can go and work on that skill set.
Okay, good. Hey, Dave.
You talked about could you tell us about the people with whom you're collaborating in general or specifically? I'm curious what kind of group has come together to do this great work.
It's a small group. Internally we're pretty small. There's only 4 of us. But we train people to work with the tools, and we've got maybe 100 people out there who are working with our tools as as really representatives of our work. They're certified to work with our tools. And then we have all the stuff that we give away, and there are people out there that are working with stuff that they've just gotten off the website and are starting to build. So I consider them to be a kind of community as well, because they're often in schools, trying to put some of this stuff to work in building curricula and doing stuff on the ground. So so we're a small organization, but there's probably a good 50 of us who meet and work together on a fairly regular basis. But most of them not as employees of our organization.
So as much as in order to develop this assessment or assessment tools, would that require software engineers? What are some of the special abilities you need to have in order to build particularly the assessment? Because that seems to be an awfully important rock you're pushing up the hill.
Yeah. I've had 1 or 2 programmers for the entire time, helping with doing that part. I've also learned how to program myself to some extent. Polymath. When I was in advertising in Los Angeles, I learned design. So I got
There you go.
those that came in really handy. And of course I'm an academic, so I've got the research skills.
Yeah.
I often work with people who are doing PhDs on their work and get them involved using our data in that way. So there's a bunch of dissertations out there using some of our data. Yeah, it would have been nice if it had been possible to do something like this within the existing academic environment, but there's no way. No one's going to do a project that's going to take 30 years,
And they wouldn't know where to put you anyway.
I didn't have a place. There wasn't a place.
Applied psych? No. Maybe it is. No, maybe that.
Yeah, there were developmental psychology departments, but the moment that I left the academy, they all closed down, became neuroscience. So
yeah.
And with tiny experiment, you're only allowed to do little things and not have big theories. So that was really shut me out. So I just decided I've had 3 or 4 other businesses. So I just thought, well, we'll figure out how to pay ourselves to do this.
Well, if you had a billionaire who's listened to this and I'm not him or her, and they gave you a big boatload of money, would that help in accelerating
Oh,
work
absolutely.
that you're doing?
But I won't take any money that's got any strings attached to it whatsoever, so it's unlikely to happen. So our intellectual property is being protected, within a nonprofit, so that it can't be owned by anybody.
Yeah.
And we're trying to create as an organization, a nonprofit organization that can stand on its own and hold those tools and continue to develop and improve them over time, without it becoming someone's property that someone gets rich off of.
I get it.
It's very difficult to do.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry.
Punished. Doing nonprofit work in this country, totally punished.
Yeah.
Because way more to do business, because we have to have an audit every year. And I mean, our accounting costs are 20% of our income.
Yeah.
Because it's just horrible. But if you want to keep something out of the hands of people who are just going to use it as a moneymaker, which means it gets abused, right?
I'll keep nurturing it then.
Yeah, so we're working on it.
Okay.
Determined,
So
stubborn people here.
we're gonna wind down. And thank you, Theo, for joining us. I love your stories and I love the perspectives you shared. I'm really glad to have taken this time for myself, but I'm really appreciative that you gave us this time as well. Did you have anything that you would like us to understand that we didn't get to today?
Oh, there's so much. If you're interested, come and join us. Yeah.
Can I ask the last question?
Oh, of course, Vishva. Vishva always asks the last question. It's tradition. Go ahead.
The question is, with VCall and all these skills, how do you draw a parallel between the world that we have right now and the technologies that we have with game design and what you're doing with VCall? Both have that addictiveness to it, right?
Gaming completely recruits the dopamine opioid cycle to waste your time, because especially children's time, because children need to be in physical contact with the material world and people 90% of their time. when they're awake. And
Mm.
we no longer have children growing up in human normal environments now, and it's causing real serious problems, like unbelievable unhappiness and pain, psychological pain. So hopefully we'll be able to tend to that as well. It's going to be a hard one.
I think we're gonna close this here. I'm sorry, and thank you everybody again, and we'll edit the video and get it published here not too far in the future, and will be on the community site. And Theo, maybe you'll come back and give us an update one of these days.
Take care. It was a pleasure. It was nice to see so many faces. There are new faces.